Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm Dr. Tobias LaGrone, and welcome to Soul Talk. I'm excited about our subject matter tonight, and I'm excited about the guests we have to talk about this important subject. Tonight, our discussion centers around mental health and suicide in minority, Black, and Brown communities. Our special guests tonight are trained clinicians and working professionals with decades of experience helping people become the best version of their own self. I'm Dr. Tobias LaGrone. I'm just excited about Soul Talk. We want to give you just a second or two to let your friends and family know that we are on. We have been anticipating tonight's subject matter, and we just want you to let friends and family know that we are on, and we have our guests in studio, and we are getting ready to start here in just a few seconds. So please, ma'am, please, sir, we are sharing to a few pages. We are sharing to a few pages right now, and we want you to do the same. All right. People are coming in. Excellent. We see people coming in already. We are going to share to a few more pages, just a few more pages, and we will get started on tonight. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right. It has been shared. Listen, what we aim to do at Soul Talk is to bring to the general public the best professionals in the fields of education, of counseling, of business, to let the community know that there are voices who are well trained and well experienced to address issues within our own community. It is important that we tell our own story. And tonight, I'm fortunate to know these two great professionals whom I count as colleagues and friends. And tonight they're going to come to us and help us better understand what it means to deal with the understanding of suicide. Our guest tonight is Officer Kelli Singleton Louis and Dr. Janique Washington Walker. And what we're going to have Officer Lewis to come to us first and share with us a little bit about her life experience, her education.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kelli Singleton Louis. I am a social worker and life coach. I also work in federal law enforcement. I have a bachelor's degree in social work from Southern University and a master's degree in social work from Louisiana State University. I've worked in the social work field for many, many years, as well as the federal law enforcement field for the past 12 years. I'm so excited to be here tonight to share some knowledge and information and insight into such an important topic. So thank you for having me, Dr. LaGrone.
Hello.
Go right ahead, Dr.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was wondering if we were disconnected. My name is Dr. Janique Washington Walker. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I have a doctorate in rehabilitation counseling and counselor education from North Carolina A&T State University. Aggie pride to all my Aggies out there. I also have a master's in a psychology degree from North Carolina A&T. So I've got all my schooling from a wonderful wealth of professionals there on that beautiful campus. My background and specialty is in trauma. I've primarily worked with adults who have witnessed some level of trauma in their lives, whether it be through domestic violence, physical abuse, and maybe in their childhood, other complicated traumatic events. I've worked with using cognitive processing therapy, as well as some other methods. And I'm excited to come here today to share what we need to do and have this discussion about the issue of suicide in the African American community.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Tonight's subject matter is for informational purposes only. Tonight's discussion is not a substitute for you seeking your own professional help from your own local hospital, mental health facility, primary care physician. Tonight, we do invite questions, and we will be selective in the questions that we may address because we want you to know that it is important if you're having suicidal thoughts or you're dealing with extreme depression. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is a place where they have trained persons 24/7 that can answer your questions and direct you to the services that you need. Tonight's subject matter in our presentation is not meant to offer counseling, but our presentation is a public service awareness event. So please, ma'am, please, sir, we have information here and we are ready to get started. Our Dr. Janique is going to go first in her presentation, and we are excited. And let's give some thumbs up and hearts as Dr. Walker comes to us.
Thank you so very much. So we have a brief video we would like to play that is coming out of the area of Baltimore, Maryland, and it just discusses John Hopkins University's recent research in regards to suicide rates in African Americans post-pandemic. So Dr. LaGrone, if you don't mind prompting that video. We'll give him a moment to bring that up.
We are pulling up the video. Dr. J, if you will proceed, I will let you know when the video is ready.
Okay, thank you so very much. Well, just to get started about this conversation, suicide is definitely a major issue in the United States as a whole. Nearly 130 people die of suicide every year nationally. This is a national statistic. And what's even more disturbing is in recent years, suicide has been the third leading cause of death for African American adolescents. And we find these numbers rising in general over the course of the past 10 to 15 years. So it's a challenging thing to see just how suicide for African American men has become 4 times greater than African American women, and that our overall rate of suicide is 60% lower than the non-Hispanic and white population, but yet we're steadily rising over the years. So something is going on. There is some research that's also been pointing out that even younger Black females in grades 9 through 12 were 60% more likely to attempt suicide back in 2019 as compared to non-Hispanic and our white counterparts. So we have to think about what's going on in the past 10 to 15 years where we've seen this influx in suicide rates in pretty much every age group for the African American population. We want to have a discussion as to what are the stressors that's leading to these numbers increasing over time. Can we have another slide, please? Much of these statistics are coming from Department of Health and Human Services. They've got a division that specifically focuses on minority health issues and that the issues of African American individuals. They've got additional data as it pertains to African American female adolescents, just again showing that increased between 1991 and 2017, whereas other racial ethnic groups are starting to decrease, we're increasing. And we're going to talk about some of the things that might be going on with our youth that's causing these changes in our rates. Okay. And with this, oh, thank you so much. There's two, we can go back. Yep. There's two theories associated with suicide that I've picked, multiple, but the two that I wanted to focus on is the interpersonal psychological theory of suicide. And there are about three components to suicide. The things that are going on with people emotionally and interpersonally, in which they've developed this desire to no longer be here, okay? The first is the worded belongingness. What does that mean? Basically, it's this idea that someone no longer or does not have a sense of belonging to a particular group, whether it be society, whether it be family, whether it be, a particular social group, whether it's school, church, etc. This person has its understanding or feeling as if they don't belong and they're lost in that situation. The second component is this thought and feeling of being burdened or burdensome, perceived burdensome. They think that whatever is going on with them personally is a burden to other people for whatever reason. It could be somebody that, feels as if their depression or what's going on with them is so heavy that they don't want to put that burden on somebody else, which is why a lot of people don't share what's going on with them, right? And then lastly, my note got so small, Dr. T. I got to get used to this. Thank you so much. And lastly, it's the acquired capability. So once you've had the sense that you don't belong, okay, then you moved on to feeling as if you're a burden to other people. The next step is having acquired capability, meaning you have the means. You've thought about this, you've decided that you no longer want to be here, and all of a sudden now, whether you come up with a plan, you've identified what your resource would be, what your weapon might be, what your choice of elimination might be, and now you've been able to acquire the capacity to execute suicide. Those things combined lead to a successful suicide. The second theory that I want to mention is the integrated motivational volition theory. And this idea is that there's a pre-motivation to commit suicide. Maybe it's a trigger or a stressor going on in that person's life that person doesn't seem as if they have control over. And as they pre-contemplate this situation and what to do about it, they can actually be moved to execute suicide, to develop a motivation to do the act. And this comes from constant triggers throughout their life, whether that be stressors that have no relief, burdens that don't seem to be worked through, and that person just constantly encountering, relived traumas from these stressors. They develop this motivation to do this. And then finally, the volition is the part of execution. So everyone has a different story when it comes to whether it be depression, anxiety, stressors associated with their life that they're dealing with that leaves them feeling as if they don't have many options or that living on this earth is too burdensome, and how they come to an understanding of what their options are and what leads them to suicide is a personal choice. But I think that whether it be through the interpersonal channels of that theory of suicide or motivational piece, there's some relevancy to the populations and our community in regards to what we've experienced with all the stresses that we have going on internally and externally in the United States. Next slide, please. So, what may be causing the increases in suicide? In my line of work, I've seen folks who are dealing with generational trauma. Maybe it's related to historical trauma from oppression, systematic oppression. It could be exposure to vicarious exposure to what we've seen in the news with police brutality. We've had a number of deaths that we witnessed over the past 7 to 8 years, to name a few, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, a recent time, and of course, Deontay Wright, for example. So seeing this on the media and also witnessing the oppression ourselves in our everyday lives, it's overwhelming for folks, and creates a sense of despair in some people. And that despair can develop, for some, thoughts of suicide. There's challenges just culturally when we're on social media dealing with cultural appropriation and how other folks are using our images, our ideas, and et cetera. And we can feel lost in who we are as a people. There's complexities with social media interactions for young people in regards to body positivity. What they see online, is it real? Everything perceived online, it's not authentic, but a lot of our young people are rating themselves based upon what they see online, right? And, maybe even a sense of not, being enough with where they are in life, whether it be financially, again, physical appearance, emotionally. There's this fog of falsities, I think, online sometimes, where people are not presenting themselves as is, and you can paint yourself in the best light. And what we don't realize is that others viewing this information take it in, and they're evaluating themselves on that. And someone has low self-esteem comparing themselves to what's on social media. It can definitely cause increased depression, and for some, in extreme situations, lead to suicide. So it's a challenge just dealing with life itself, with the pandemic and all these other stressors, natural disasters. And our colleague Kelli will go into more of that, of what our people are dealing with systemically that can be causing these rates of increases. She'll go into detail about that. But we as a people, we've been through a lot historically, in present time. And I think that a lot of folks have just hit their breaking point. And that's why we see these rates increasing. Here are some other possible causes. In the past 10 years, there's a longitudinal study I was just speaking of that was written by the CDC, showing how suicide ideation and suicide attempts have increased for our youth. Past 10 to 15 years, if you think about it, what's changed? Our connection to technology and social media. Our kids are experiencing life in a different lens now. And that includes cyberbullying. Again, the situation with body images, dealing with, of course, those false personas I talked about before, comparing themselves to others, and other social pressures. This is theoretically what some of the research is leading to in regards to what our young people are dealing with that causes them to feel depressed and unhappy with themselves, and that may be triggering some suicide ideation in our youth. The piece is that technology is not a negative thing. Don't get me wrong about that. But the problem comes from if you have a child or an adolescent who is already fractured in a way, whose self-esteem is already low, someone who really seeks validation from other people. When that validation is put on through or encouraged through social media, it's a dangerous thing. If somebody is really measuring their self-worth based upon likes. So we need to be careful with that with our kids and make sure that we are uplifting them in other ways, that they feel solid in themselves and understand the complexity of social media use, and understanding that what's presented online isn't always as it seems. Go ahead, Dr. T. So of late, an example of some of these challenges that we've seen of late, this beautiful young lady, Chelsea Chris, Miss USA 2019, recently committed suicide by jumping from her high-rise building, or high-rise apartment building. And, this death was just so striking to many people because via social media, she checked off all the boxes, I would say, of what most people would mark as levels of success, right? She's beautiful. She's accomplished a beautiful title. She seems to be wealthy. She seems to have, all the connections. She seems happy online. She looks gorgeous. She's what a lot of young women would aspire to look like and to be. And for whatever reason, this young lady was not happy with herself or the situations that were going on in her life, and decided to take her life. What I found interesting about the passing of Miss Chelsea Christ, her mother did write a post and explain that even she wasn't aware of her daughter's challenges until it was too late. And that just went on to tell me that this young lady presented herself a certain way online for so long, here and there, making some statements here and there that can hint that there was an issue. But for the most part, she would look like a blossoming, happy person, and then abruptly decides to hurt herself. My prayers go out to her family, but we need to check on our family members and encourage our folks to talk and to express how they're feeling, to know that they're in a safe space, because we know that historically African Americans have dealt with a lot of stigma when it comes to mental health. And I think that's where the hesitancy comes from, sharing about what's going on. But yes, that one was just hit home hard for a lot of young people. It's just a sad situation. She has another post there that I wanted to share that she did place online. Dr. T, I think it may be the next slide. And before she passed away, she wrote, may this day bring you rest in peace. And so, this was a gloomy post for sure. And it made me wonder, how many other people are leaving signs online, and as a people, we've kind of got desensitized. And when someone's calling out for help, it seems like we're just giving them a check mark, a heart sign, when really what they need is an intervention. Next slide, please. Another young man, Ian Alexander Jr. He is the son of, hope I have the right mama. Is it Regina King, y'all? I believe it's Regina King. If I'm not correct, somebody correct me. Kelly? Okay, Kelly gave me a head shake. Yep, so Mr. Ian Alexander Jr., didn't know of him myself until his passing. But I hear that he, from my research, was a bright young man, really supported and loved his mother, had a lot of wonderful gifts, and, dealt with depression. Some of his depression was seen online via social media. He left some signs and some comments here or there that indicated he may need to be checked on. But again, another young person with a lot to offer, who's no longer here, because for whatever reason, they decided that not being here, not living, was better than what was going on currently in their lives. And again, prayers out to that family as well. I am going to try to read that post if I can. Let me see. It's a little small for me. See if I can't bring it up for you guys. I apologize for the delay. The screens are small and I can't see. Well, in one of his posts, I know it says that he at one point reflected on the episode of SpongeBob, where things were going haywire. And he basically said, that's the way I feel on a regular basis, where things are just completely and totally off. And this other slide, this picture, he wrote that he didn't think that social media was healthy for him, which is very telling. And so I encourage anyone, if they ever feel overwhelmed with what they see on social media, if social media brings a level of negativity to your mind, has you thinking in a negative way, you can definitely turn it off and fast from time to time. It's okay. Dr. T now has Dr. Paul Nesdat's video. He is a associate professor, if I'm not mistaken, from Johns Hopkins University, and he's going to do. He did this discussion on suicide in the area of Baltimore, Maryland.
A relative decrease in suicide overall, except among Black Marylanders, there's been almost a doubling of the number of suicides during the first peak of the pandemic, during the first lockdown.
Johns Hopkins University Assistant Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Paul Nesdat, is one of the authors of this paper published in JAMA Psychiatry Wednesday.
The loss of support and the isolation, having sudden economic falls, and having access to a weapon, these are all things that contribute.
Add to that the stressor of racial strife in the country and recent police killings of Black people like George Floyd. Edgar Wiggins, the executive director of Baltimore Crisis Response, Inc., says the overriding theme of the thousands of calls they take on their crisis hotline is one of stress and despair related to COVID.
In terms of people being unemployed, people who have less means to begin with, being especially stressed out. So COVID is one of those things that our crisis counselors hear every day on the phone.
Higgins adds, historically, Blacks have not reached out for mental health help because of the stigma attached to it.
I think it's possible that whites had a lot more economic support, had maybe more access to mental health care if needed. We know the disparities in both of those things between the races. And so it might be that that's the reason that white suicides went down, whereas Black suicides went up.
So that's a wonderful, segue into what Ms. Kelli has to say in regards to suicide in African American populations. So Kelli, you heard it first. He said in the pandemic, suicide rates have increased for African Americans, and there are disparities associated with, financial capacity and et cetera. And can you lean into that and kind of explain, your take on what's going on with us as a people and what may be influencing these increases across all of our age groups? It's like the data is just so stark when we see the numbers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. I really appreciate all of the information that you presented. And I want to piggyback on some of that information as I segue into my perspective on the increase in suicide among people of color, including African Americans and also young people. So I will jump right into it. Here's what we know. And I have some slides that I will put up, and we will follow along with those as we have the discussion. Dr. LaGrone, we can't hear you if you are saying something.
Thank you, Kelli. We are loading the slides up right now and adding them to the screen. And there we are.
Awesome. So to piggyback on the information that was presented by Dr. Walker, here's some things that we know, and this will recap just a few of the stats that she already shared with us. So the most recent data from the CDC suggests that the overall suicide rate in the US declined during the pandemic. However, those rates increased for young adults and people of color. So as the video said, and Dr. Walker touched upon, experts believe that the pandemic added to what was already a stressful time for certain subgroups in our country, including people of color. So we were already suffering from job security, food shortages, and things like that. And so COVID-19 was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So there's no surprise as to the increase in some of these rates among certain groups. So what is driving these rates? I think that's a question that we definitely have to ask as we work to try and combat this issue and find some solutions. So for me, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, to better understand the why behind this increase in suicide for people of color, we must change the way we view this problem. So suicide is a public health issue. It's not solely an individual issue. According to the CDC, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2019, 12 million people in the United States thought about suicide. 3.5 million people made a plan, and 1.4 million people attempted suicide. So looking at this issue from a public health standpoint, I believe will help us better understand it and also work to combat it. As a society, viewing public health problems in a more holistic way will not only help us to have a broader perspective of the issue, but help us to have broader and more effective solutions to combat this problem. So looking at it from a systems perspective, I think will help us to understand some of the external factors that also play a part in individual decisions and individual behavior. So the systems theory in social work is based on the idea that behavior is influenced by a variety of factors that work together as a system. So if we're using a systems approach to view the increasing suicide rates for people of color, this allows professionals and social scientists to observe and analyze the systems that contribute to a person or group's behavior and welfare. So what does this mean? It is impossible to combat an issue without considering the environment or the system in which the issue was bred. There's a saying, I'm sure you all have heard it before, and it says you can't get well in the same environment that made you sick. And I added a caveat to that, and it's you can't get well or stay well in the same environment that made you sick. And when I think about an issue such as suicide rates among African Americans, I often think of plants, plants or botany, the study of plants. And I think about flowers and how no matter how strong a flower is, if the soil isn't right, if there aren't balances within the soil, the flower will not grow, it will not bloom. So I think about individuals in that same way. If the systems that we interact with are not conducive to growth, then we can't expect positive outcomes for individuals. So let's look at some of the systems that impact society and consider how we fare as people in these systems. So in the housing market or the housing system, Blacks have a home ownership rate of 47% versus 76% for our white counterparts. So if you look at that in another way, most white people own their homes and most Black people do not. That's an alarming statistic to me. In the system of healthcare, just about all of the research, and we heard a little bit about it in the video that was shown, but just about all of the research that focuses on disparities in our healthcare system point to an overall widespread disproportionate access to healthcare, which leads to disproportionate mortality and morbidity rates due to lower levels of access to medical care and higher rates of unemployment. We also have an overwhelming disparity in the receipt of therapeutic resources such as mental health and wellness services. In the area of education, in our education system, this one is definitely near and dear to me as I think about individuals like Ruby Bridges, who was the first person to desegregate a school in New Orleans. And this was in the, this was in the 60s. So as late as the 60s, most Black people were educated in fully segregated schools. So this doesn't mean that we were less educated. It absolutely does not mean that. But what it does mean is that our schools were not funded at the rates of our white counterparts. So while we've made strides in education, our schools, even to this day, the inner city schools that are predominantly Black are not funded at rates that our white counterparts are in their schools. Another system that we can look at is our economic system. Black families have a median wealth of 10 cents for every dollar of the median wealth of white families. In the criminal justice system, while Blacks make up 13% of the population in the US, Blacks and Hispanics account for 56% of those incarcerated in prisons throughout our country. The unemployment rate for Black people is double that of white people in the United States. And in the area of politics, 89% of elected office holders nationwide are white. So when you have these systems like that, where we are negatively and disproportionately impacted, the outcomes are not positive for our people. When you can go to the next slide, Dr. LaGrone. So when we as people are negative,
Hey, sis, I want to say this. So is there a build up of frustration in the context of the multiple frustrations that we deal with? And I think Dr. J talked about vicarious trauma. And how over generation after generation that those frustrations begin to multiply, and they are adverse effects not only upon our psychological self but our biological self as well.
Absolutely. As the video said, and I think Dr. Walker touched upon as well, we're already behind in these systems that impact us every day. So when you have such a crisis as a worldwide pandemic or any other event like a natural disaster, it's really no surprise to me that rates of suicide have increased. It's no surprise to me at all. What do you think, Dr. Walker?
I will say there's research that speaks to this. There was a research study done that identified pretty much that discrimination was the primary source of depression in African American people, mm-hmm. and correlated with increased rates of suicide. If you think about it, our inequities that we've experienced due to these systematic injustices, that is discrimination. And all of that stress compounded over time. You can't keep, bending on something. Even in a rubber band will break eventually. You keep tugging on it enough, right? On both ends. Right. I was thinking about your stat on housing. Mm-hmm. And that we only, was it 47% of us own houses?
47% versus 76%, I think, for our white counterparts.
And if you can remember from the video from Johns Hopkins, it was stated that our people, African American people, have less resources when it comes to finances. And I thought to myself when you said that, how many people lost their homes in the pandemic? How many homeowners foreclosed on their homes during the pandemic? Because it only takes 90 days for your home to enter foreclosure. And it took almost 3 to 4 months for the country, the government to decide how they were going to support people. We know that there's been a slew of resources for renters. But what about those homeowners? What about those people who were struggling in the beginning anyway, month to month, to pay their mortgage? And we're talking during the onset of the pandemic, and even now, employment is unstable. A place will be open, COVID hits, there's a COVID scare, shuts down again. So you can't even get, any regular income coming in. Would love to see that stat, but I would predict that a lot of our folks, that 40%, 47%, lost their homes
Mm.
at greater levels than our counterparts.
I'm sure.
That.
Me too.
And being that we haven't been able to meet in our usual gathering places, whether it be our faith-based community, our fraternities, sororities, and other family gatherings, we haven't had those check-ins to know what level of distress our community is in. So many times in our westernized society, we are told just to toughen up, to push through.
Mm-hmm.
And as Kelli was talking, I presenting, I thought about the incident with Antonio Brown, the wide receiver, very talented young man,
Mm-hmm.
and how the NFL often pushes down and the media often pushes down, especially on African American men.
Mm-hmm.
The least little thing that they do, they become quote unquote the whipping boy, or the person that they're going to talk about and be derogatory towards. But so initially when Antonio Brown walked off the football field and threw his jersey up in the stands, people said, "Oh, he's just acting out again, or he's entitled, he's arrogant." But then when Antonio's attorney and his team said, "Hey, we have text messages where the coach, Adrian Bruce, knew that Antonio's ankle was severely damaged. In fact, the MRI showed that the ligaments were torn from the young man's bones, but he was still expected to go back on the field and perform and be tough enough." And once again, we as African Americans, I think we are looked at as less than human, that we're supposed to just bear it, just bear. I want to read this quote. It just came to mind. Kelli, I'm going to pull your slide back up, but this is from, I think, Zora Neale Hurston. Oh, yes. And this is what the quote said. Zora Neale Hurston: "If you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoy it."
Yeah.
This is good. This is good. This is good. There you go, Kelli.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one and wrap it up and continue our conversation. So all of these outcomes that I have presented in all of these systems that we interact with on a daily basis, and I want everybody to keep in mind that these are systems that have the exact opposite effect on our white counterparts. They're able to experience wealth and optimal health and prosperity, while these same systems produce negative outcomes for our people. And these things are documented throughout the years. We can all sort of remember some of the things that were put in place within these systems to prevent us from prospering from the benefits of these systems, such as redlining and voter restriction laws and mandatory minimum sentencing in the criminal justice system. So Blacks who were already significantly behind in every system in the United States, there's really no guesswork as to why the suicide rates have increased. When you consider these circumstances, which for the most part have been beyond our control, the stress of it all can certainly be very, very overwhelming. We are human. We're not robots. We do feel the brunt of these things. And so you add on top of that a pandemic or a national disaster. And I mean, it's no surprise that these rates of suicide have increased amongst our ethnic group. So imagine being in a high stress, traumatic environment every time you wake up and have to either go into any of these systems, a system of employment, a system, our education system. And it's a reality for many that this is just consistent trauma, persistent trauma over and over again. So a pandemic only was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think as we continue to look at these systems and how they impact us, we have to look at solutions on a macro level. And one of the things that I believe, if we're looking at it from a systems perspective on the macro level, it all boils down to, well, one part of it is representation. If we aren't represented in those areas where the laws are made, in those areas where the policies are enacted, in those areas where important decisions are made, in those boardrooms, on those council seats, in those DA offices, in the state house, in Congress, if we're not represented in those places, we aren't able to make the decisions that impact us within these systems. So I believe that this public health issue, of course, we should make sure that we are presenting resources to individuals, ensuring that they have access to mental health care, access to certain resources that will help the individual. But there's another level to this, and we have to look at this on a systems level, on a macro level, to be able to really combat this problem.
Awesome, awesome. Dynamic information, dynamic presentation, dynamic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is great. Team, let me tell you, we have questions coming in, and the questions were posted earlier, and they said, okay, where are you going to get to my questions? So I let people know we will be addressing questions soon. Please know there are resources in your local area, ma'am and sir. I am going to place up here one such resource that is called Psychology Today. If you are in need of mental health care, looking for a therapist, psychologytoday.com is a good resource that you can just simply go to that website, type in your place in your zip code, and they will let you know who is in your area. I think I'm freezing a little bit. They will let you know who is in your area. Excellent. There we go. There we go. Awesome. Well, we have a few more minutes, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to touch on a sense of what does it mean? How do we navigate in a world that offers so many challenges, not just for the broader community, but certainly for minority communities? How do we navigate those challenges? How do we navigate those challenges? And so I'm going to pull up, and y'all, I want the two of you to stay in studio because I'm going to bring you back on shortly. How do we navigate those challenges? Give us 1 second to. So the way we navigate those challenges, it is imperative that we acknowledge the cognitive signs in regards to what it means for a person to be depressed, but also acknowledge that the society that we live in and the pressures that come along in society offer challenges. Let me find the slide that I'm looking for here. There are 60 slides here. We have a lot of information. And let me find what I'm looking for. And then we will wrap up for tonight. It's probably on slide number 30. Yes, please continue to post your questions. And we will come back to that. There we go. So when we think of suicide, Suicide, oftentimes a precursor to suicide is depression. And I think if we're all honest, all of us have been depressed at one time or another. Depression is as common as the common cold. What is not common is when we find ourselves in that depressive state, that low mood, that sense of hopelessness, not wanting to go on, and it lasts for extended periods of time. And so that is when depression becomes a problem. But if you look just at the political landscape, if you look at climate change, if you look at the divisiveness in politics, even as something as simple as do you wear a mask or do you not wear a mask, something as simple as in common sense as that has become a divisive wedge issue in our community. And for those of us who try to operate with some degree of logic, reason, and rationale, it can make you a little depressed. It can make you a little. It can make you. It can make you a little depressed in that regard. When we look at what can lead to depression, sometimes depression, a precursor of depression, it can be genetics, it can be brain chemistry, chemical imbalances, poor nutrition, poor physical health, health issues that should be treated, but they go untreated because a person may not have insurance, or a person's work schedule is so that they don't want to miss work to get a checkup or to get an annual physical. Of course, drugs and addiction and stress are all issues that affect our level of mood. We see here that depression and suicidal ideation is not just a matter of will, but it is actually a physical, neurobiological, neurochemical event that happens in the human brain. And you see the striatum and thalamus, the dorsal prefrontal cortex, the posterior regions of the brain, and under MRIs, we can see those regions of the brain that are affected, that shows up on the MRI and give indication to a person who may be in that place of depression. So when depression happens, and because of that neurochemical response in the brain, there's a diminished cognitive control of emotion and behavior, cognitive inflexibility, impaired valuation of different decision options. And then there's a struggle in mediating dynamic interactions between the extended VPFC and DPFC and IFG systems. And as you can see that listed in the brain and the connections in terms of the prefrontal cortex, the cerebellum, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. And so those enhanced negative and blunted positive internal states, negative self-referencing, impairment in future thinking, and depressed rumination. And so for those of us who are in the faith-based community, I want to tell us that telling people to pray about it and move on is not enough. It is not enough. We need professional clinical help and even in some terms medicated help in order to help the brain come back into a sense of chemical balance, and so the person can have a functional life. We're going to try to wrap this up. So this is more data. If you will email us, I'm going to put our emails up. We want to keep it within an hour. I will send this PDF to you. So one of the things that we don't talk about enough is stress. We get stressed out. When you're living in a society where you work twice as hard, get paid half as much, it is easy to be stressed. We have the social justice summers that we have had. We saw what happened in terms of with George Floyd. We see the shooting of unarmed young people. And so it is difficult for us to watch these things and then look for a sense of justice. We saw what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, and sad to say, even though the person should have gone to jail, we still as a community were surprised when those who victimized Ahmaud Arbery actually went to jail. And I want to bring my other guests back on screen here, because we have become so accustomed to living with injustice that has become a sense of normalcy for justice to be denied for us. And that is sad. That is sad. So we see what happens in terms of stress. There's positive stress, tolerable stress, toxic stress. Then we have what we call adverse childhood experiences, and those adverse childhood experiences are those traumas that that children experience in childhood. Dr. J, will you touch on that a little bit? That's your area of specialty.
Sure. So Dr. Filetti in the 1980s, he actually was a medical physician that specialized in weight loss. He observed that many of his patients who were dealing with weight loss issues, who were making progress, unfortunately, if a stressor occurred, they would gain their weight back. And so he wanted to figure out what was going on with those folks emotionally, conducted a study on them, and that led to the 5 ACEs. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which with the ACE study. And basically he asked them, well, what types of trauma have you encountered in your life? Were you from a broken home? Were you exposed? Were your parents drug users? And a number of other questions. And what he found in his research, that when the number of experiences increased, that also increased the likelihood that person would encounter some serious physical health and mental health challenges in adulthood, whether that be substance abuse, decline health, hypertension, and overall a decrease in life expectancy. What was interesting about that original sample, it came from middle class white participants. And yet those folks had high ACE scores. You would think that these are people who should not have a whole bunch of concerns. They should have great opportunity and all of the disenfranchisement that people of color encounter. Many of these people hadn't, yet they had a high ACE score. Well, this study has been replicated with underserved populations, people of color. Dr. Nadine Burke out in California, she had a clinic in which she ran an ACE study at her clinic in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And man, did she find just how challenging the higher numbers of ACEs we encounter, meaning our people have been exposed to all types of trauma and what that meant for us and our life expectancy rates and all that we've encountered. If you think back to the slide that Ms. Kelly showed in regards to some of the disenfranchisements that we've experienced as a people, oh no, that wasn't you, that was Dr. Tobias. You said the precursors to depression, whether it be substance abuse, it could be genetic, it could be health, it could be, those are the outcomes, the negative outcomes of having trauma exposure. And so we as a people have had a lot of those experiences, right? And stress being, I think, one of the top.
I think, Dr. Walker, I think we've gotten so accustomed to, because it's so commonplace, we've gotten accustomed to living in dysfunction, and that dysfunction equates to trauma. I mean, it's purely trauma. It's traumatizing to see the outcomes for us within these multiple systems that we have no choice but to interface with. It's very traumatic when you look at numbers like this. And we live this stuff day in and day out. So even those of us who have access to some resources, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. The numbers don't lie. So we have to, I believe, take out this preconceived notion that it is an individual problem. Things like this are individual problems. Yes, we should address the individual. Of course we should. But these are things that we have to address on a systemic level. We have to not forget about other people who are impacted negatively just because we might know people who have a few better outcomes than we do. We have to remember that as a whole, our people are suffering negatively, and we have to figure out why. So looking at it on a macro level will, I think, help us to have better outcomes in these areas, and ultimately help to decrease the number of suicides among our people and young people as well.
I think it would be helpful too, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but at least to talk about, resiliency and how to build it, because resiliency and protective factors is actually the defense against depression, and of course, suicide. We need to think about our core, historically, what has helped our people to push through, to stand strong in all that we've experienced, and getting back to our basis. There's a lot of research that shows that our protective factors historically in the Black community has been our religious connection. It's been practicing in religious practices, attending church or whatever it is that you do spiritually to take care of yourself. That is important to us as a people. We lean on social and emotional support through our networks, through our community. That's through family support, peer support, finding a connectedness within our community and in our social groups and activities, and then having that strong sense of identity. As African American people, being able to engage in our history and our culture, which we know all around the nation, there are states that are trying to strip us from this practice. That's important to us. We want to be able to share our history in schools, right? And not have to go home to hear about our truth, our stories. That's a part of us as a people building our resilience. And that's our defense against negative thoughts of suicide and depression.
That builds resiliency. The time is upon us, but I'm compelled to share this because resiliency is so important. Soren Kierkegaard stated, "To be born is to struggle, but to struggle is to become." And I think having people and professionals like us, but also family support systems that tell people it's okay to be tired, it's okay to struggle, because struggles in life, though we become tired from them, it's through the struggle that we build a level of resiliency. And we cannot live in this false narrative that you should be ashamed if you ever lost a house or you went through foreclosure or you had a car repossessed. Because what I see in life is that so many people are living what I call a green screen life. Mm-hmm. That on social media, you can be anybody you want to be, have anything you want to have, when in reality, most people are not multimillionaires. In reality, it is stated that that 80% of Americans, 80%, hundreds of millions of people, don't have $1,000 in the bank in the event of an emergency. And so what we want you to understand tonight is that just because life is tough, that doesn't mean you have to quit. Because resiliency, from my faith belief, is that my faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That is a scripture that informs my faith. For other people, their faith in resiliency is that I'm looking forward to seeing my grandkids again. I'm looking forward to traveling the world after having worked 30 and 40 years. But watch this. It's okay for us to say that, hey, I don't want to work 30 years, 40 years, or 50 years before I can enjoy life. That does not make you a socialist. That does not make you a communist. It makes you an aware human being who you don't want the life that your mother and father had. working at the same place for 40 years, worked for my father, worked for my mother-in-law, my mother-in-law, my stepmom. But the new generation that is coming, and our generation as well, we don't want to do that. And it's okay. That doesn't make us communists. It doesn't make us socialists. And we want to give you permission to say, hey, it's okay to want something outside of the westernized mentality of keep your nose to the grinding stone, struggle, be a good citizen, and pay your taxes, keep your head down. You were not created to keep your head down. You were created to become who you were designed and birthed to be. One of my favorite existential psychotherapy, even though he says he's not really existential, but from my perspective, Dr. Viktor Frankl, he said, everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And I think to some degree that the frustration that disenfranchised communities feel is that our bodies are over policed. Our bodies are not considered as sacred as other bodies when it comes to the medical profession, whether that be in prenatal care and maternal care of Black mothers, whether that be in we as African American men are often diagnosed later with more dreaded diseases. And so what not only do we need faith, we need therapy. But within the context of therapy, in the context of psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy, thoughts affect feelings, feelings affect actions, that cognitive triangle. But Dr. Frankl, who was an Austrian psychiatrist, who ended up in the devastating, deplorable conditions of Hitler's Nazi Germany, he came up with this formula. S minus M equals D. Suffering without meaning equals despair. Suffering without meaning equals despair. And we will come back in months to come with other episodes that particularly deal with young people who are really having psychotic, neurotic breakdown. Thank you, Kelli, for sending me the video that you sent me of that young man. When I was home in Mississippi, my mom, Mother Mary, shared with me that was a young man, 19 years old, that videoed himself live walking in front of a semi-trailer because his girlfriend had decided to move on with her life in another relationship, as she had all the right to do. So there's something else that we have to explore, right? Right.
Absolutely.
There's something else that has to be, but suffering is a part of life. Nobody wants to be in a perpetual state of suffering, but suffering without meaning equals despair. And then we get stuck in the place of why. I've been there. Why? We examine why. No, why? Why God? Why me? Why me? Why universe? Why world? When we look on Facebook, everybody's living the life fantastic, when in reality, nobody escapes without suffering. We were birthed into this world. I'm not a woman. My wife is. When a baby is birthed into the world, that's pain, right? Mothers, that's pain. We don't escape. You come in with pain, and if we live long enough, I talked to a good friend of mine who's in her 80s now, and she said, Dr. LaGrone, I'm doing well, just got a little arthritis. But thank God for it, and she's going to the gym, so forth, so on. But if suffering without meaning equals despair, Frankl states that any person, watch this, who can find a why reason to live can survive the pain and trauma of any what they may experience. Oh, if we can find a why reason, something bigger. Now, this has been tested because when he went to Canada, he did a means test on students at a Canadian university who were committing suicide, one particular university, around midterms every year. They had a high number of suicides. I think at UNC Chapel Hill, there were suicides last fall, right? And so we can't get stuck in the why. We must look for the what. What is my purpose? So the most important question is not why did this happen to me? The most important question you can discover is what is my reason for being? And your reason for being is not to be a YouTube star. It is not to drive a Bentley or Rolls Royce and have a private jet. All that stuff is fine if that's your lot in life. But the most important thing is you growing in becoming that unique, universe design, God design person, whatever your belief is, that you are birthed and created on purpose, for purpose, and with purpose. And out of your purpose, you will discover your meaning. So if suffering without meaning equals despair, then suffering plus meaning equals discovery of destiny. We cannot name one person in history that did not suffer. Maya Angelou, her suffering and the abuse and the sexual abuse and the deplorable states of her youth led to, and I know why, the cage bird say. Barack Obama, uniquely placed, lost his mother at an early age, raised by his maternal grandparents, father not in his life, but it molded and shaped him to be a unique person for a unique time that helped pull America from the cuffs of collapse. Martin Luther King Jr., influenced by his father and grandfather, a legacy of preachers. Oprah Winfrey in the struggles of her life, just to name a notable few people. So when our suffering is connected with meaning, when we find that meaning through therapy and also through our internal will, whether it be our faith, whether it be doing a biopsychosocial, spiritual journey, writing what our story is, we discover our destiny when we find out our meaning. So Dr. Howard Thurman said this: there's something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. If you cannot hear it, you will all of your life spend all of your days on the ends of strings that somebody else has pulled. And I really believe that when you look at these notable, famous people who commit suicide, maybe they got tired of society pulling their strings. That I have to be a certain weight, a certain image, have to be it. And maybe we can circle back here and talk about like Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Marvin Gaye, Roger Nelson, Prince, great people, great souls, but maybe they stayed in that realm too long. Because how long can you be the star in a world that changes stars now every 15 minutes?
Wow. Where is the lie?
Where is the lie? Where is the lie? It's all around us. It's all around us when we don't look for the genuine in us. So Howard Thurman, I love him. He said, don't ask yourself what the world needs. And isn't that what influencers do? You know, these young men have made a movie called Jack ASS. And that has made them famous, just doing incredulous things that are dangerous. And then there are influencers who are looking for bombastic things they can do to get attention, to get likes, living for likes. And then Facebook and meta-analysis and YouTube and Twitter and Instagram running analysis and data. How do we get people attention? And Dr. Thurman says, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go and do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I pray that helps you build resilience, Tonight has been awesome. We'll have closing statements from our guests, and I'm just humbled and excited to have these two wonderful friends and professionals to come on and share. And tonight has been wonderful. And this is the first of many to come. And these two will be back. We have a ton of questions. We have a ton of questions. God bless you. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Much needed discussion. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Here's one question. I want us to address this question. It's from one of my church members. It's a long question, so I'm going to read it, and I'll put it back on screen. She said, "Lots of our children and grandchildren stay closed up in their rooms with their phones and computers. They don't want to talk or interact with other children or adults. They want to be alone in their rooms with the doors closed. How do you reach them? How do you know what they're thinking as they just refuse to communicate with you? I have never seen kids act this way ever. What do I do as a grandmother to reach my grandchildren and they have such anger? All this started after COVID." Very relevant question. And so I want to open the floor to the two of you to.
First off, I think one thing we need to do is take it back to the old school parents. Take it back. What do you mean, Dr. J? I mean, create a healthy relationship with your children with healthy boundaries. We have to remember who's the parent here and to enforce a certain culture in your household. Will there be some young people who might be resistant at first? Maybe encounter some attitude and etc. because we require family time and we limit their social media access or internet access and etc. Maybe, but it's worth it because we need to see a sense of connection, and they need to be ingrained in the relationship, and have that conversation, create, that intimate time where you're getting to know one another, play some family game nights, make things interactive, because guess what? We're always in the metaverse. Metaverse meaning online social stuff all of the time. We're all guilty of it. But we need to take it back and spend some more time in person, and don't make it an option. Will there be some pushback initially? But once they get used to the culture, I do believe we'll see some changes in behavior. As parents, we have a lot of control. We just have to exercise our control, and we can still be cool. They'll get used to it. If your little one, a young person, is having a challenge talking to you, it's okay to sign them up from counseling. Get them somebody that's safe, that's educated, that can give them healthy information so that they can have a safe place to disclose. I know sometimes it's hard to connect, but we don't want to leave our young people without an outlet, because they'll find one, and the one they find may not be the one that we want them to use.
Kelli?
I agree. I was going in the same direction as Dr. Walker. Setting healthy and realistic boundaries, I think, is key. I think we do live in a day and age where we sort of have to shift and adjust with the technological changes that are occurring. Some are pretty positive. Others are, really detrimental to our kids. I would suggest that everyone watch. There's a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma that gives a lot of information into the impact of social media on our children and on us as well. So healthy, realistic boundaries, I think, is key, and lead by example. Set healthy and realistic boundaries for yourself as well, and your children will follow.
Well, team, thank you so much for being on tonight. It has been rewarding, informative, and we will be doing this again. We went just a little bit over, but it is worth it. We want everyone to know that the next 3 weeks from now, we will be back on, and I will have 3 African-American males on to talk about African-American men, grief, abandonment issues, and the increased use of marijuana and other drugs as self-medication. And you don't want to miss that because so many people are saying that marijuana is just like a cigarette. I have news for you. It is not. It is not the same thing. So please, ma'am, please, sir, tune in and have your friends and family tune in. Dr. J, Sister Kelly, I love y'all to life. Give our love to your family. Tell Brother Fred, tell Brother Derek, we are just thankful for the family giving y'all space and time and holding down the fort for you to come on and just be a part of this conversation. We're just grateful. Sister Patricia said, hey. So thank you. Everyone share this on your platforms and look out for announcements. Once again, tonight's program, let me say this. Tonight's programming is a public service announcement. It does not indicate any type of endorsement of Soul Talk, nor of Dr. LaGrone's own personal political ventures, things of that nature. Tonight's conversation is not a substitute for you seeking your own professional mental health care, be that with a local provider or going to your emergency room. We have provided the National Suicide Hotline. If you're having thoughts of suicide or self-harm, please, ma'am, please, sir, call this number. Everyone have a good night. We thank you so much. We love you to life, and hang in there, everyone. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. We are so fortunate to have had such professional, intelligent, and educated persons to come on and talk about this much needed subject. If you're having thoughts of self-harm, suicide, please call the number 1-800-273-8255. We really want to bring best practices, evidence-based information to our community to help people be the best version of themselves. I'm Dr. LaGrone. This has been an episode of Soul Talk, discussions on mental health and suicide in Black and Brown communities. God bless and good night.